Now, one of the things in any movement you're going to begin to realize is that people can become quickly excited about a project, and then there's something called compassion fatigue. You notice we have now had 71 teams working in the Gulf. Right after Christmas, we had our 71st team come back. Now, 2005, Hurricane Katrina, a lot of people got excited about working in New Orleans. Now in 2012, that excitement has dampened, and a lot of people have lost sight of New Orleans, right? So what we did this year for our Christmas miracle offering, okay, we've been in Sudan since 2005. How can we get people in a struggling Dayton economy to keep sacrificing at Christmas? So my idea this year, this came from, again, constantly renewing vision, focusing on vision. My idea this year was that we would split, well, not split, the first $500,000 would go towards what we need for our budget in Sudan next year, and everything over would go towards projects in Dayton. I thought this would renew. So again, casting the vision, here's a video we put together. Now, if you're going to do a Christmas offering, you got to be talking about it all fall. You can't start the first week of Advent. You got to be casting this vision. Remember, repetition, repetition. So here's a video we put together for the sole purpose of casting vision and combating compassion fatigue. Okay, let's move now into the plan, strategic plan. So you have this picture. Now what you need is a strategic action plan to accomplish that picture. Strategy is about having a clearly defined mission statement. Now, one of the most frustrating experiences I have when I go into your local churches is that you sit around and you waste a lot of time coming up with these big mission statements that no one can remember. You don't have to. We have a mission statement. The United Methodists have a very clear biblical mission statement: to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. We don't need another mission statement. That's it. So now what we need is a clearly defined strategic initiative to accomplish that plan. How do we make disciples? Remember, it's not about members. It's not about attenders. It's about disciples. That means you may have to get smaller before you get bigger. So at Ginghamsburg Church, we have, and I started it in 1979, a very simple strategy for making disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. So it's not about, like, we don't have a single staff people. Like a lot of mega churches, you have a single staff. You have all these kind of staff and programs. Programs don't make disciples. Disciples make disciples. So our strategy at Ginghamsburg is to involve people in the simple life rhythm of celebration, sell, and call. The simple life rhythm of celebration, sell, and call. Now, celebration is the commitment for a person to make, and every member at Ginghamsburg Church has to make this commitment, to weekly worship, right, within the community of faith. So weekly worship within the community of faith, and private daily worship. Eve, this is so important to me. My wife and I have a cabin in North Carolina, so when we're in North Carolina, we worship with two little Methodist churches. Because just as a follower of Jesus, I must come out where two or three are gathered in my name to worship and celebrate the gift of life, right? I mean, so how do we involve people in that life rhythm of corporate worship and personal daily worship? John Wesley saw that was crucial. Now, secondly, to be involved in a cell group where they will be held accountable for the commitments they made and encouraged to follow through. Wesley said that people could be easily converted under enthusiastic preaching, but just as quickly fall away if they weren't connected to a class meeting, and what he called class was much more like a home group than what you and I would identify as class today. So Cell ministry is absolutely essential to the process of discipleship. Just last Friday night at our church, we had a dinner for 206 cell leaders in the church, cell pastors, and we also, I taught for an hour, and really I was setting them up. We're bringing Bill Donahue, who's an expert in cell ministry, in on February 25th for a whole day of training with our cell leaders. Training is essential. It's not just recruiting people, because if you may be happy because you have 17 cells meeting in your church, but what may be happening is that it's a friendship group instead of a discipleship group if there's not training or curriculum. Or especially this year in this political season, where people are going to be, arguing politics, so it becomes an opportunity for people to argue politics, rather than to really become one in uniting in the purpose of Jesus' mission in the world. And then call is for people to identify the passion that God has placed in their heart, like Dr. Steve Guy in that group, for somehow their passion became the island of Jamaica, to help them discover their burning bush. So we realize that discipleship happens as people live in that life rhythm of celebration, cell, and call. That's our simple strategy, to involve every person in this life rhythm. So it's not about having a bunch of classes, a bunch of programs, and doing all of that kind of stuff. This is our strategy, to make disciples of Jesus Christ for transformation of the world. Any questions about this? Pretty simple strategy. Right, pretty simple plan. This is what I'm about. There's my plan. Did you think it was more complicated than that? Go ahead, back here.
When you report membership numbers, who can be treated you?
Well, when we report membership numbers, it's people who really have made a commitment to membership at Ginghamsburg Church, which in Ginghamsburg it's around 1,500 right now. So our people who make the commitment is far fewer than people who attend. So I hate it when I hear in the church people reporting membership, because membership is not really the litmus test of how many people are serving in the world. If you're just a member and not a disciple, we need to, as Wesley did, get people. We're going to have baptisms on Easter morning. But we don't do baptisms apart from Easter. Was always a time for people to go through kind of a preparation for baptism. So what we do, if you're going to be a member at Ginghamsburg, you go through a 13-week class. It's called Follower's Life. Matter of fact, Abington has printed our resource that my wife wrote. It's been a long... It's called Following Jesus, and it's they may have it here in the bookstore. There's both the Leader's Guide, which is the big copy, and the Participant book, which is the smaller copy. And in that 3-month class, you really discover what you're going to commit to. It's the same with John Wesley. You didn't become a Methodist because you decided to just make a commitment to be a member. You had to go through a process and make a commitment. Otherwise, you were an Anglican. And Wesley thought all Methodists were Anglican in his time. But Methodists were people who made a commitment to a deeper level of discipleship. So that's what it means. Our communion table is open. Anyone can take communion in a Methodist church. See, we've adopted more a Baptist theology of membership, is that membership is a profession of faith. No. Anyone can take communion in a Methodist church. Anyone can serve in a Methodist church. But Methodist comes from the word methodologies. And if you were going to become a Methodist, you had to commit to certain methodologies. And if you didn't, right, you got a ticket that they punched, then your name was removed at the quarterly conference and you couldn't participate in the love feast. Back here.
How do you, we just expected on the folks who said, no, we should make these a member easy, but
I disagree with that, even though I have great friends who do that. Adam Hamilton would be on the other side of me on this. But, I believe that we set the bar up front, like where Jesus Jesus was skeptical of crowds, so he told them right away, look at Jesus' sermons or parts of sermons we have. Hey, wait a minute, do you guys understand what you're getting into? You better calculate the cost. I'll go with you anyway. I want to be a member. Hey, yeah, buddy, the foxes have holes and the birds there have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. You want to sign up for that number? And someone else says, well, he says, follow me. And the guy says, yeah, first let me go and say goodbye to those at home. We don't have time for that nonsense. Let me go home and bury my father. Let the dead bury the dead. So, we want to be very upfront. So, hey, anybody can take communion. Anyone can serve. You can't lead unless you're a member. But anyone can serve. Very, very open. Everyone's welcome. But membership is like ordination for laity. It is the license to serve. It is the accountability to serve. So in this class, it's 13 weeks. The first month is Christology. The second month is the Holy Spirit, gifts of the Spirit, how ministry is gift-based and so forth, identifying your gifts and passions. Like you hear me say, hey, I'm not a pastor. I'm not a counselor. I'm a teacher. I'm a prophet. I'm a leader. When I function in those gifts, the body's healthy and it benefits the body. When I try to do something I'm not, the body is not as healthy. The third then is theology of the church, covenant, so forth, ministry of the church, hands and feet of Jesus. You can look. I don't know if they have it here at the bookstore or not. Has anyone seen it in a bookstore? It is. It is there. And sometimes Cokesbury doesn't know there's two parts. There's the leader's guide. Most often they'll have the leader's guide or the participant guide, but not both. And then after the class, they are interviewed. You go through an interview. And you make 4 commitments to be a member at Ginsburg. One is a commitment to public and private worship, celebration. 1, to be in a cell. And 3, to be functioning in the call that God has placed on your life. And 4, to tithe. What is tithe? Yeah, 10%. A lot of people in the church don't understand that. They think it's just an offering. But so members, and so can you understand why if we have 5,000 people attending Ginsburg, we have 1,500 members? Because we spell out what they're getting into. We let them know up front. Everyone's welcome here. You can serve. You're welcome to the communion table. So that's what we do with our membership process, which raises the bar of the commitment level in our church. That they have made a commitment to public and private worship, consistent. In our culture today, have you noticed how many people are in church, even though they may even be tithers, especially my generation, but who may be there once a month or so? And even when they go away, my generation is the up and down generation. We're either up in the mountains or down to the lake at weekends, or we've seen our grandchildren. Yet a lot of these people are still faithfully supporting in significant ways through their tithe. But okay, fine. When we're in the mountains, we go to 2 little Methodist churches and participate. I'm going to be there in February, and we're just like we do in our home, working with 20-somethings and 30-somethings. I'm invited the 20-somethings and 30-somethings in this church to meet with us at our cabin when we're down there, because we've always got to be about discipleship. That's a commitment I made. Now, is ordination commitment higher than lay commitment? No, it's we're equal in this. The problem is we don't even have a very high ordination commitment, of what the covenants mean and understanding covenants. And then the second is to be actively involved in a cell. What I love about my friend Adam Hamilton, when I was at his house last, is that he has a cell group that meets in his home. So he practices. Why he's my pastor is he's the real deal, and he practices what he teaches, which is significant. And the third is to be actively serving in your call, whatever your gift mix is. And fourth is to tithe. That's the commitment that we have for membership. So this is our clearly defined plan. Celebration, cell, and call. That is our strategy to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Any other questions about, is this, if you look at a big mega church like Ginsburg Church, would you think our strategy would be much more complex than that? Yeah, it's not. It isn't. See, because I know the mission statement is not to provide programs for all age levels, even though that's important, or is to have singles ministries and all so forth, because really we're one community, and there's singles and their marrieds and so forth in that one community. What happens some of the times we do organizational church is we don't have the diversity of age groups. I cringe at churches that try to be one age kind of churches. Like, we just want to be a Generation X church or millennial kind of church. Well, then what happens with you older men mentor younger men and older women mentor younger women is we need not only the diversity of racial diversity and socioeconomic diversity, we need age diversity to be healthy community. And as a matter of fact, all of us have come from screwed up backgrounds in some way. The Christian community is a place for reparenting. All of us are being reparented in this kind of community. It's a process of sanctification. Well, we're constantly, we lift it up constantly as what one of the commitments of what it means to be at Ginghamsburg and how change happens. And so we'll say, hey, today out at the welcome station, there are people there to tell you how to become part of a cell group. Or we also have classes periodically that we call Cell Start. And so it would be a group like this. Let's say that you all are new people at Ginghamsburg, and so it's 4 weeks. And in those 4 weeks, we meet, and you get to meet different people in those 4 weeks. And you all say, hey, we live out on the same side of town. How about us trying this together and to begin to meet? And then we also give people to permission that, I may be with you guys in a cell group, but you're just not. It doesn't connect. So then I'm now with you in a cell group and it connects. So we give people it's okay to change and opt out and so forth, and to find that kind of place that best helps you grow, where you can be real and be yourself. One of the mistakes I made with Ginghamsburg when I first came. You want to hear failures or mistakes? Is I was discipled in Campus Crusade for Christ in college. And their model, which was very much kind of a reform model, here I was a social work major, and I came out of a liberal United Methodist congregation. And I write about this in my book, Hijacked. So I had all of the social dimensions of what it meant to be a Christian, but I didn't really have, Campus Crusade gave me the personal dimension of being, and it kind of brought the two together. But Campus Crusade kind of had this celebration, cell, and call model. That's kind of where I stole it from, is they had the big group meetings on campus, kind of the celebrations, and then they had what they called, in those days we called them action groups, cell groups, and then they went with you to help you become a cell group leader. And it was kind of the model that everyone would become a cell group leader in your dorm or wherever you were. Well, what I discovered is everyone's calling is not to be a cell group leader. So when Carolyn and I started the first group in our home 3 months after we were at Ginghamsburg, I said, hey, in 6 months, the commitment to be in this group is that you will be replicating what you learn. There's a commitment replicating. What I discovered then is some people were great cell group leaders, and they took off, and other people really had other passions and callings in their life. To start a resale clothing ministry or to start a food pantry. So really what cell group is about helping people to discover their unique burning bush and then throwing gasoline on that burning bush. So that's what I saw. And then that's how all of these ministries just blew up at Ginghamsburg. Who would ever think of someone dreaming up a medical storehouse facility called Give Ministry? What you see in New Path is one of our 501c3s. Remember how I told you yesterday we've got to think beyond the offering plate? If we're ministries lifting, and if you have a 501c3, outside monies, grants are available to you to help support. So when she said her ministry is dependent on New Path, that's the 501c3 that we birthed, and New Path is dependent upon Ginghamsburg. So again, look at these wild ministries. All of the way that Ginghamsburg is impacting the community and world came from the people, because people were living in this rhythm of celebration, cell, and call, and what we're doing is helping them get in touch with their God vision My mission, my short mission statement, I call it an elevator mission statement, is to connect people to their God destiny. You know, and if you had to explain your mission statement in an elevator, it's to connect people to God's burning bush. Am I doing that to any of you today? Am I helping you to get courage? That's my purpose here today, is to really encourage you and throw gasoline on your burning bush, not my burning bush. And it's amazing, all the ministries. You saw Communitas today, what's happening in Jamaica with, I didn't think up any of these. Now remember, movements are not made in a moment. I've been there 33 years. So I have a vision. I keep refreshing that vision. And then I have a strategy, a plan to accomplish that, which is to involve people in the life rhythm of celebration, sell, and call. So you want to make sure your celebration is prophetic, powerful. There is no excuse for worship that sucks. We have a saying at Ginghamsburg, suck does not honor God. Suck does not honor God. So we work. One of the reasons I got into contemporary music is that it is a lot easier to do contemporary music with excellence than sacred music with excellence. As a matter of fact, in 1979, and the numbers decreased, in 1979, there were only 4,000 people in America studying the organ as an instrument. That's gone down. And in my church, the organist was weak. It was a pianist who shifted over the organ but didn't know how to play the organ the way it should be played. Man, there are all kinds of good musicians playing in bars and everything else. Do you see? So immediately when we're a recovery church. One of the first things I started at Ginghamsburg, the first month I was there, was AA. So what we saw is that we had great musicians coming into the church because we were a recovery church. And all of a sudden I knew I had a bunch of drunks and dopers who could play excellent music. One of our bass players right now just told me Saturday night that he's been sober for 8 months. He said this church has been a powerful experience in his life. So a lot of how I discovered this stuff are what I call God accidents. You know, is that it's just easier to do excellent contemporary music. I mean, look at a lot of the country western folks and singers and so forth. You know, way back in my day, Chris Christopherson, that dude can't sing. You know what I mean, Bishop? You know who Chris Christopherson is. But made a lot of money. So people have this standard of music they listen to. And by the way, I said this to someone this morning. Everyone in our country who ever grew up with sacred or traditional music is dead. My dad just died this last year. He's 86. Guess he was listening to Elvis Presley in his 20s and the Beatles in his 30s. See, and right now, over 80% of seniors in America are unchurched. So the only people who have a past tradition of traditional music are church people. Most of America is unchurched. Who are the people who want to reach those folks? So I'm not going to, now if Bach comes in next week, I'm going to be doing Bach. But that's not what's playing. You know, I hit scan on my radio in every town I come through. How hard is it to find a traditional classical music station? It's hard. There's 4 country music stations in my area. There's a 1960s rock station. There's classic rock station. You know, hit scan on your radio, and you'll know what the people in your neighborhood are listening to. So one of the most important things I think is you don't have to abandon traditional worship. Have a traditional worship, but then add a contemporary at prime time to reach the people that you want to reach. Don't get, old people are still willing to come earlier to church. Younger people need a little bit more moderate time, getting kids and everything ready. Now, when you talk about strategy, celebration, sell, and call, one of the things I do to be strategic is I have what I call my 1-year rule. Every year I act, when I make my strategic plan for the year, if I had 1 year to live, what would I do? Like, is it Jay? Jay, if you knew, if I said, hey, Jay, I've got this revelation from God, I'm making this up. This is not. But November 27th, you're going to die. Would that change the way and what you did ministry this year? How many in the room, if you knew you only had 1 year to live, would it change the way you do ministry? That's the most powerful thing I do every year in my life. I do not have time to play church. That's why at Ginsburg I said, I started this way in my 20s. I'm 27. I'm almost dead. I don't have time to play church. And I say that, all the time. So what I do is basically, in my yearly plan, 3 things. What I see most pastors are doing, they're not clarifying their 3 objectives for the year, and they've got too many, and they list. I say, well, let me see your objectives for this year to accomplish making disciples. And they'll have like 12 things on their list. I have 3. So my first year when I went to Ginsburg was this. 1, preach. The pulpit is a powerful place. So what I did my first year was a series on the book of Acts. How are we going to know what we're to be as the church if we don't discover Acts? It's not called, you notice it's not called the devotions of the apostles or the theology of the apostles or the music of the apostles. It's called the Acts of the apostles. How are we going to know? So I began, my very first sermon at Ginsburg was on Acts 2:38, day of Pentecost, and the people were saying, Peter, what should we do? And the first thing he said is repent. And I said, repentance means that we have to go 180 degrees in the opposite direction of what we are doing right now. Now, Peter wasn't talking to the pagan Gentiles. He was talking to the people in the house, people under the covenant. He was talking to, let me be so loose here to say, church folk, right? So if it's not, God, if we're not going to do it, God can make the rocks cry out. But the key is you're almost dead. Right? And if we're not willing to go 180 degrees in the opposite direction that we are going in right now, we are going to miss the life stewardship that God has trusted us with. Second week, be baptized for the forgiveness of sins. I talked about the meaning of baptism. Baptism means dead, buried, and out of the way. So when my sister comes up here and says, I don't like the music we're doing, you're hearing parts of my sermon. This is the second week at Ginsburg. You can understand why the godparents wanted me out. And someone comes up and says, well, that's not the preference of my music style. And I say, well, sister, if you have any preference left, we're going to have to go Baptist on your behind. You haven't been held under the water long enough. See, dead, buried, and out of the way means that you have no preference left. Right? We have to die to every dimension. We have to die to our Republican ideology. This is what I was preaching. We have to die to our Democratic ideology, red, blue, whatever it is, our nationalism ideology. That's why we're going to have to get rid of the flag, because we have to empty ourselves so that we can have the mind of Christ. That's what baptism means. Bishop, do you see why they've never moved me to a bigger church? I'm still waiting to go to Troy. It had 207 when I came. It has 198 now. They've worked real hard to stay stable like Methodists. Their goal was to. So then the third week was, you shall receive the Holy Spirit. And I said, this ministry is going to be supernatural. So it's not what we can do in our own strength and resources. It's what the Holy Spirit is going to do through us. So, when we say something like, yes, that's what we should do, but we're a little church. You can't understand. You came from that big church in Cincinnati. We can't afford to do this. Well, anytime we only attempt to do what we think we can resource in our own strength and energy, God's not going to bless it because that's walking by sight, not by faith. So then one of the first actions we did as a board is you can never vote no if it's something Jesus would do. You're seeing all this stuff on the screen. That was very important to the DNA. So, what we said was, hey, in seminary we used to argue, did the resurrection literally happen or not? Because, people were saying to me, well, Pastor, we could go bankrupt. I said, well, let's test God and see. If the resurrection happened, then this could happen. Am I right? Let's test God. And they say, well, Pastor, we could go bankrupt. I said, well, big deal. It's not our church anyway. It's God's church. So let's go play. So that is such important to the DNA of Ginsburg. If you can't vote no, if it's something Jesus would do. So no matter how stupid it sounded in 2005 to step out in Darfur and invest all of this money when John Jaweed was burning everything down and it was desert. What if it doesn't rain, Pastor? And we had, do you remember last night? 18 bag return for every bag we planted. So then I went on, and that the basis of the church is not primarily the temple, but it's from house to house, and all of the places in the New Testament where Paul greets the church in their house, Priscilla and Aquila, and that it's about relationships, and that you can't have relationships if you're just sitting here looking at the back of each other's head. You know, the commitment to daily devotion, we went through and looked at that whole thing, and then the commission to go therefore into all the earth. This is not just a movement that will be in this little, and we were in that little 2-room country chapel for 5 years until we moved into a church built behind it that would hold 200 and some people. This is a movement that will reach the whole world. Why? Because God will do it, and Jesus promised it. And so I spent a whole year on the book of Acts. Now the second thing I did then was create a church within the church. Disciples. You know, 70 people, 60 people, 90 people are too many people for a pastor to disciple. Why do you think 74% of churches in America are under 100 in attendance? Because that's the size a professional pastor can give sacramental care to. But 60, 70, 80, 90 is too big for me. So what I did is I was preaching that series on Acts. After about 3 months, I invited about 12 of those people into my home whose hearts were strangely warmed. You could tell. They were the people who weren't sitting there doing this or this. How many of you look out every week and see the people who are doing this? Right? Am I right? That's because their spirits are asleep. And if so many times you'll notice it happens as soon as you read the Word. They're in a deep spiritual sleep. And they may not ever come out of that sleep. One of the things I learned while I'm preaching is not try to look at those people because they take energy away from me. And shouting louder does not wake them up. So what I do is focus on the energy people. And so I went up to about those folks who I saw, man, they were like taking notes and they were doing some strange things. Do you know the people I'm talking about in your church? See, I focus on those people. So I went up to them and I went, Carolyn and I are going to start a secret group in our home on Wednesday evenings. And we want you to be part of it. So what I did was eliminate the Wednesday night prayer meeting that had 4 old ladies coming to it. And I went. The first week, they told me, hey, your responsibility is go to the prayer meeting. And so I went, and so I came and moved a few chairs in a circle. There were these only 4 older women, and I think the youngest was in her late 60s. And Aunt Lena, precious lady, was in her 90s. And everyone called her Aunt Lena. And so they go, well, and I said, well, let's pray. And they go, well, you're supposed to do a Bible study. Well, I was told this is a prayer meeting. No, the pastor always comes and does a Bible study. Well, I said, well, this isn't making disciples. We got to cease this nonsense. Why weren't they praying? So instead, Wednesday night, these people came into my house, and we, as you already heard me say, we cut our teeth. First book, naive 27-year-old pastor on Dietrich Bonhoeffer's The Cost of Discipleship. That's where we began. These were going to become the Deborahs and Joshuas that led this revolution in the church, right? These are the people I'm going to use. So what I did, and you can believe I was catching all kinds of hell. I went in April to this church. And the other problem, Bishop, is I went early because the pastor before me had had an affair. So it was an early appointment. And you know how that is. So they're already upset. And in the interim, after he left in the November, and so they had a retired pastor in the interim. And now it's April, and I come, and they want to keep the retired pastor because he's safe and doesn't have long hair and blue jeans. I remember the staff parish when the district superintendent introduced me. Someone said, "Well, it'd take a long time to trust a young whippersnapper like you." That's what they call. And then they go, "What do you know about? You come from that big city, Cincinnati. What do you know about country people?" And it was so bad that when we went out in the parking lot that night, the DS said to Carolyn and I, "You don't have to come here. That was pretty bad." But I so believed that every person mattered to God, and God wanted the revolution of the kingdom in every place. I said, no. I looked at my wife, because my wife looked at me like, good, we're going back to Cincinnati. And I said, Carolyn, I said, God is going to do a miracle in this place that touches the world. That goes back to vision, right? Now, plan. Let's begin to disciple adults like we disciple kids. And so what happened is then we moved to, at the time, George Hunter had a book out called Contagious Congregation. We moved to Contagious Congregation. We moved to Howard Snyder's book. All of these were back in my 20s. Howard Snyder's book, The Primal Wineskins. Now, Howard and I are great friends. He was a powerful mentor in my life. And that began to set the DNA. Now, here's the third thing I did then, was right-size the governance of the organization. Because our people were meeting every night of the week almost in every single committee the United Methodist Church could have. So if you had 80 people in the church, there were 20 people there. So, hey, I was in youth ministry. I was used to discipleship and mission, and now the pastor was sitting in meetings for 3-4 nights a week. I'm sure none of you have ever done anything like this. So two part. Here was my strategy. The people were giving me literal hell from April when I went there to November when we had Charge Conference. Now, I'm head of nominations. What have I been doing? I've been discipling a new group of Deborahs and Joshuas in my home. Do you see what I mean? So I enforce the discipline. Here's what I say. Always use the discipline when it's to your advantage. And the scripture when it's not. Bishops see why they never move me out of Kingsburg. So what everyone in all of these meetings, the least tenure was on staff parish with 13 years. Because they would come off, you know how the discipline says you need a year break? And we do this at Ginghamsburg now, even with our board, and I hate it sometimes when we have to release for at least a year a great board member. But I think it's important to continue to develop new leaders in your church. So it's a wise thing in the discipline. It's also wise to make sure that no group of people control the church, single group of people. So I said to all these people, hey, look at the discipline. You've got to take a year break. As a matter of fact, the trustees were a husband and wife. I don't know. I've been out of that, well, same church, but out of that style. Does this still happen in the church, in little churches where crazy stuff like this happens? So there was such a control. Now, the godparents would have loved new people to come in, but not have any kind of control, just give money and serve where they didn't want to serve. So all of these people I'd been discipling in my home, like I needed to stay in this church. So I took one of those Deborahs that we had been discipling in Bonhoeffer and Snyder and so forth and made her head of SPR. I took one of those Joshuas that we had been discipling. We had to finance this mission, right? And put him in charge of trustees. Getting the picture? Now, okay, that solves one problem. Do you see how revolutions happen? Do you see the strategy in this thing? Hey, I don't want a representative board. I want a missional board. All people are equally important to God, but not all people are equally strategic. I want your board, your governance structure becomes the ceiling of how far your church can go. You better believe I'm discipling those people in my home, and if they're not willing to commit to the process of discipleship, they're not going to be on my board. Now I have to downsize the board so that we're not meeting 3 nights a week. So what I did was go to a simpler structure. Simple organisms multiply faster than complex. So what we have now at Ginghamsburg Church, and we kept getting simpler and simpler and simpler. Isn't that amazing? That the bigger, here's a very important principle. To get bigger, you have to get smaller. We now have a board at Ginsburg Church of 12 people. This is allowed by the 1996 discipline because Bishop Huey and I fought for this at Denver, and it's now part of the discipline. Before this, I did it illegally. Now I'm doing it legally. We need innovators in the church who operate in the spirit of the discipline, but not the letter. So we have one board of 12 people. You can have any structure in your church, governance structure, as long as it answers 3 needs: staff, parish, trustees, and finance. And you can email our financial executive, business executive at Ginsburg. He has all of those paragraphs in the discipline that he'll give you those paragraphs because you do need the accountability of your district superintendent on this. So we have one board of 12 people. We meet one time a month. They met last night. Isn't that something that after 33 years they can do it without me? Right? Okay, one board of 12 people. 4 of them are HR, 4 of them are finance, and 4 of them are trustees. Those 3 subgroups met sometime during the month before the board last night. The finance group always meets at 6 o'clock, 5:30 or 6 o'clock last night, and they have a sandwich supper together. They always choose right before. Some of the other 2 subgroups like to meet 6 o'clock for breakfast somewhere. Now, what's so powerful about, then they come together last night for accountability and to throw gasoline on the direction of the church. We also go on a retreat every year together to plan the next year's ministry. So no one can be on the board who can't take time off of work to go on this retreat and make it a priority. We also go to conferences like this together, often from churches who are ahead of us, and study where the church is going in the 21st century, which is essential. You can't have people on your board who aren't willing to become experts in where the church is going in the future. So the genius of this is now, because when this little church I went to, the mission of this church had become the maintenance of the organization. So all these people were wondering why young people didn't want to be involved in the church is because young people aren't looking for meetings, they're looking for meaning. Do you see the enthusiasm and meaning that we're demonstrating by all of the ministries that these folks dream up? So now only 12 people have to be involved in the administrative structure of the church, while the rest of the church is being released to be the hands and feet of Jesus in the world. And the 12 people are people who get energy. That's their gift mix. Like the lady who heads the 4 subgroup of HR is the head of HR at Huffy Corporation. So again, what you want to do is any business in this world knows right now, to compete, you have to downsize your organization. I refer to General Motors because the Methodist Church is set up based on General Motors' organizational structures of the 1940s and 50s. And the Methodist Church, General Motors went bankrupt. Where's the Methodist Church headed? Bankruptcy, right? We lose. I can't believe we lose 80-some thousand members a year. 80-some thousand members a year. I remember when we had over 10,000 members. Now we're under 8,000 members in the United Methodist Church. And what did General Motors do that we're not discovering and will be too fearful to do probably at General Conference? There's no more Pontiac. Can you imagine that? There's no more Oldsmobile. There's no more Saab. There's no more Saturn. There's no more Hummer. I mean, you have to right size in the world we are in to compete. And the way we do that is in governance. So the first year I was there, I just did 3 things. Preach from the book of Acts, disciple in my home, a new group of Joshua's and Deborah's, and right-sized my governance structure.